the role of humanities and the role of STEM in education. In general, there is a prevalent opinion that STEM education teaches you how to think and the humanities don't. That's unfortunate because, in fact, it is the humanities that have proliferated the tradition of thinking into science. And science started with the humanities, in particular with philosophy. STEM education is very tool-driven, skill-driven, but it has, particularly when it comes to the king of sciences, which is physics, also the quality of teaching people how to think. So in essence, when you push this to the extreme, you get to the conclusion that there is really only one science, and that is philosophy, and that because of the knowledge that we've accumulated over the last couple hundred years in particular, we had to split philosophy and create the discipline of physics. But in essence, those are the same sciences, or this is one science. And all the other sciences are kind of cousins and granularities, chemistry and biology and things like that. You might say there's also a quality of descriptive science versus a science that actually is able to explain and then also predict. So there's a lot of context here that needs to be laid out before we get to the fundamental question, and that is the role of humanities in the age of AI. Why is that even a question? Well, AI is changing the way we relate ourselves to ourselves. Humans were under the impression that they have something very special in terms of a brain and intelligence. And ever since the transformer architecture has revolutionized AI, we're getting to the conclusion that maybe what we have is not so special. It's a very similar architecture like the transformer-based foundation models, where we have a bunch of connections and attentions that we pay to these connections, and that's where the thing we call intelligence emerges from. Whether that's true or not, let's put that aside. But right now, when it comes to practical purposes such as jobs or competing in a math competition, or competing in chess, or any kind of activity that we consider intelligent, it seems like we're losing, and we're losing fast, and it's only a matter of time until we're going to have basically no field that we consider today as a cognitive field of excellence for humans. It probably won't. We won't be left with anything where we can beat the machines. Even things like art and novels and things along those lines, paintings and music, where we have a little bit more leeway. It looks like it's thanks to the Moravec paradox is on physical activity. So it looks like it's going to take a little bit longer for a robot to beat Lionel Messi in soccer or Baryshnikov in dance, but that might also be just a matter of time. So where do we stand now? Why is this a problem, and what is the problem? Well, the problem is humanities is the branch of the academia that deals with what's related to humans. It roots back to the Renaissance, when science was diverging from the church, when science was attempting to get away from celestial explanations of the world. It rains because Jesus is angry. Well, no, it rains because clouds accumulate humidity, and changes in temperature release that humidity, and that's called rain. So in other words, we try to understand nature And within that context, we also try to understand humans, and that's where the humanities come from. I said the king of all sciences is physics, and the king of everything is philosophy, because everything roots in philosophy, at least in the Western culture. But you could even extrapolate this to other cultures, such as Eastern culture or tribal cultures, where in the end, whether it's Confucius or some tribal person that is, a priesthood, or the Norsemen during the Viking times with their seers, they all were kind of philosophers in a broader way. So philosophy deals with questions that are eternal, questions that are transcend times and technologies and cultures and everything, the big questions. And with AI, we can ask ourselves, well, what's changing? Well, what's changing is that we have some fundamental problems that we didn't have before. For example, if we have an AI and that is only a matter of time, that will maybe be able to, run a government, and we will have AIs that run governments because there will be competition, and AIs are much better at running governments because they will be rule-based and they will not make mistakes and they work much more. And most importantly, to borrow Stephen Wolfram's argument of computational irreducibility, the only way we can actually get new knowledge and predict very, very complex outcomes is by iterate through them. And that means a machine that has more computational power than a human can do better than a human. Therefore, it might also be better at running government. So we're going to get to a point where a machine will run a government, or a machine will run the Federal Reserve, or a machine will run a school, or things along those lines. And then we have to ask ourselves the question, what is the right thing to do? Unfortunately, we already have that now. We have a sort of naive, if not even almost a grotesque situation where computer science students or AI researchers talk about, well, we want to align our AI with the right way to act, or something like that, without them ever actually asking themselves the question, what is right? So what happens typically is that the word right is just a placeholder for, well, the way I want it, which of course is often not the right thing to do. The question, what is the right thing to do, of course, is a philosophical question, an ethical question, a moral question. And in that sense, it's a very human question. There is in principle, no reason why machines should ask that question. This is something we humans care about, because one might ask themselves why we even care about these things. And it looks like good answers to these questions allow ourselves to govern ourselves better, to have better lives, to raise our kids better, to have better societies. At least that has been the case over the last couple thousand years, that civilizations that have been able to develop good answers to philosophical questions also are better at creating good conditions for their citizens. So it's worth thinking about these things. And the question is now, what role do the humanities play in this game, or game, maybe that's the wrong word, in this set of problems? And I would say that the humanities, in principle, are the answer to these questions. It's certainly not an AI problem. AI researchers deal with algorithmic questions, with engineering questions, with control theory questions, material science questions. They're not philosophical in principle. Philosophical questions such as what is the right thing to do, how are we creating a better ethical society, should we even have an ethical society, is equality something we want to strive for, what happens if we put rigid rules in a society, how does that affect outcomes if we iterate over a long period of time. Those are questions that we have to ask ourselves. We might use AI actually to help answer those questions. That is not out of, that's possible. But nevertheless, we have to ask those questions. My point, actually, the way I want to finish this episode is I want to just say, I think the humanities as they are today are clearly not equipped to answer those questions. So what we need is a little bit of a revolution within the humanities. So my point is that the humanities are necessary for AI, but it's AI that will save humanities. Because we have this influence now from AI and new questions are coming up, and also the ability to test outcomes. So we can also iterate over different, let's say, moral answers to moral questions. We could use AI and things like mechanistic control or mechanistic design to iterate over potential rules and philosophical answers to questions and see what works better. Because to borrow the concept of computational irreducibility, some of these philosophical questions are just not very well answerable. But if we just iterate over many periods in a multiverse of parallel compute and many potential iterations, we might actually discover some interesting outcomes. Well, here's a concrete example. Like, for example, we can argue to the gazoo whether having hard money is better than having the Federal Reserve. The problem is we can't really do A/B testing. But in principle, with a strong parallel compute that we already have, we can actually implement simulated games where societies with hard money versus societies with lack of budget constraints like the Federal Reserve is creating right now in the United States. We can iterate those societies and potentially see how they pan out. So in that sense, I think AI can help the humanities. My conclusion is that we shouldn't give up, right? I am a trained economist, and I sometimes feel like throwing in the towel. I think economics is utterly corrupt. It's basically a science that has turned its purpose from trying to explain very important economic concepts towards being a propaganda machine for the Federal Reserve and its cronies on Wall Street. And that is, of course, totally absurd. That's why we have absurd science. And most science that economics is producing is absurd. Just look at the Nobel Prizes that are given. So there is definitely, Ben Bernanke got the Nobel Prize last year. The gentleman from MIT got the Nobel Prize. In my opinion, he's just some sort of social justice warrior with no real science background. He is very unscientific. Let's say that, because he has an axe to grind with people like Elon Musk or other Silicon Valley luminaries, when that shouldn't be a problem for an economist, that people succeed in business, and that shouldn't even be a topic of discussion. So let's get back to the point here. What I'm trying to say is that we have an opportunity now to reform the humanities and social sciences by using AI and using mechanistic design in particular, but other techniques that might evolve to actually get better answers to questions. Now, whether we can implement them or not, that's a political question, as we're seeing right now in the United States. We had Doge trying to reform the government, but there's too much opposition because people, grifters, fraudsters, and stealers, they want to keep doing that. So, but nevertheless, we have, thanks to the Trump administration, we have definitely a massive endeavor in trying to cut corruption, and that's a good thing. And even if we can't cut everything, just the fact that we're even trying to cut the corruption is a big positive. And therefore, I think I want to finish with hope. We have a huge opportunity, not just to reform our sciences and to make better computers and better humanoid robots, we also have a huge opportunity to actually make better societies, make better companies, run better money, better education systems. And again, because of computational irreducibility, a lot of the answers to these questions, what is a good education system, or how can we better educate our kids, they might just not have ready-made answers. You can't just sit down and think about this. You just have to iterate. You have to create a set of rules and then see and iterate over many epochs and see how it plays out, and then implement the solutions or the best solutions into actually the real world. So in other words, very similar to robotic systems, we simulate and then reduce them to real. Thank you.